All right, good afternoon, folks. Gonna get started with this process. I realized I hadn't actually shown making leaven yet. So what I've got here is my starter, which I keep in this jar here, covered with a paper towel that I throw a handy-dandy hair tie onto to keep the paper towel on. I don't know if you can see that, but it's pretty mature. This is maybe a little bit more so than usual, but you can see some strands of gluten in there. Because this isn't like really puffed up, probably going to use just a little bit more than I normally would, so it'll be about 30 to 40 grams, somewhere in there, of starter. And to that, I'm going to add a whole bunch of flour and water. It's pretty goopy. All right, that's 35 grams there. Now, this will work with whatever kind of flour that you've got. Ideally, you would like unbleached flour, because that has a lot more of the native yeasts on it that exist on the like wheat kernels to begin with. I like to use a combination of both whole wheat flour and white bread flour for this. So I've got some King Arthur whole wheat flour here. And I'm going to, we're going to make 200 grams of leaven. So it's going to be 100 grams of water, 100 grams of flour. So this is going to be 50 grams of the whole wheat. And 50 grams of this white bread flour. And we got 100 grams in there. We also got just some filtered water, try and get the chlorine out of there. That I'll be pouring in here. We want the 1-to-1 ratio. We're making 200 grams of leaven to make 2 loaves of bread tomorrow. Also, quick plug for Lucy Alexander and Bearstone Pottery. She makes amazing ceramic ware if you would like to check that out. So I'll go ahead and tare this and get 100 grams of water in there. This is like room temp water too. It's not warmer or cooler. I find that my leaven rises just fine in 6 to 8 hours at room temp with normal tap water temperatures. I'm gonna mix this around real good, especially because there were some clumps in that whole wheat flour. Really get this all mixed up. Make sure the starter gets distributed well in there, so that this can rise up, and then this is going to serve as the base for our bread tomorrow. This is going to rise in a relatively warm place. I mean, warmish, warm room temp in my house. I own snakes, so I put this on top of the snake enclosures, which are kept at a relatively constant 75-ish degrees. So warm room temp. I like to cover it in saran wrap so that it doesn't gain a skin on the outside from movement of air. Also prevents the loss of moisture. Again, folks, this is for 2 loaves. So if you want to just do the 1 loaf, make 100 grams of leaven instead of 200. So you'll just want to use 25 grams of white flour, 25 grams of whole wheat, and 50 grams of water. Yeah, I'm going to cover this with saran wrap, and then we'll come back and I'll show you what it looks like when it's ready to be turned into dough this evening. Okay, so it's been 7-ish hours. The leaven has risen significantly. You can see there's lots of little bubbles in there, and it is quite airy. So it's now time to make our dough. We're going to use 200 grams of leaven, which is most of what we just made. Obviously the yeast has reproduced and actually added to its own mass. So there's going to be a little bit left over. Oh, that's already 212 grams, right? And there's still some left. And we started with exactly 200 grams, so cool. So to the starter, I'm gonna add 750 grams of 75-degree water. I'm gonna shoot for 80% hydration on this, which means 80% of the weight of the water compared to the weight of the flour. If you're just getting started, I would shoot for 700 grams of water in this stage, and then add in 50 in the later stage when you add the salt. The reason for that is the higher the hydration, the stickier the dough is, and it's easier to work with the shaping when it is a little bit lower hydration. So 700 grams coming in, or 750 in this case coming in. And we're gonna stir this around real good by hand here to make sure that all of the starter gets sort of dissolved into this water, because we want our yeast and other microbes and bacteria that we've just cultured by making the leaven to be evenly distributed throughout our dough. I'm working to break up some of these larger clumps. You'll notice that as you do this, it feels kind of stringy almost, and that's actually strands of gluten, which is what gives bread its lovely texture. Cool, well, it feels probably good enough. There's still a few chunks in there, but not too bad. All right, so we're gonna add 1,000 grams of flour total. I think today I'm gonna use a little bit of rye flour, along with more of this white bread flour. So I'm going to use about 100 grams of this dark rye flour and 900 grams of the white flour. So there's our 1,000 grams of flour, and we're going to go ahead and mix this together until it forms a nice shaggy but not dry looking dough here. Takes a few minutes because it's sort of actually hard to incorporate all of this water without it sticking incredibly to your hands as you go. If it does, go ahead and just try and scrape it off on some of the sides or the drier spots here, and it'll sort of help to release from your hands a little bit. Notice I'm keeping my fingers together here. That is because if you get it between your fingers, it's really, really, really hard to get out from in there. And this is looking pretty good at this point. You can still see a little bit of dry flour in here, but that's gonna absorb some water. I'm scraping down the sides with my fingers a little bit, and then I'm going to scrape my fingers with my other hand and try and get as much of that dough back into the bowl as possible here. So we're going to let this rest for 20 minutes, allow the flour to relax into the water and sort of swell up, and then we're going to add some salt and some water. All right, so it's been 20 minutes. The dough has sort of plumped up a little bit and absorbed a whole bunch of water. So we're gonna add a little bit more water and some salt. I usually use uniodized salt, but I ran out of finely ground, so Gonna have to use regular old Morton's today. So for 2 loaves, 1,000 grams of flour, we're gonna use 20 grams of salt. Sort of sprinkle that all around the top and on the sides. And then I'm gonna add 50 grams of water to help this salt sort of get into the dough. We're then gonna mix this, try and incorporate that water in here by sort of folding and stretching this a little bit. Make sure we scrape up off the bottom and off the sides, so that we can make sure to incorporate all of the salt and all of the flour. You'll notice that I'm always folding towards the center here so that it kind of makes this blob that I can then turn over and it looks kind of like dough. Cool. So I'm gonna stretch it out a little bit just by picking it up a few times, and that's as much as I'm gonna work it for now. I'm gonna set a timer for 30 minutes here, and I'm gonna repeat this stretching process. So I'm gonna pick it up, stretch it, and I'm gonna do this every 30 minutes for the next 2 hours. Optionally, if you really wanna go for it, you can sort of do it again after the 3rd hour, but once after 2 hours, you'll see it starts to like plump up and get airy, and you don't want to degas it too much. So yeah. Oh, and I'm again gonna put this at like sort of warmish room temperature, like somewhere in the like mid-high 70s, above my snake enclosures. Not everybody has that. You may need to let it go a little bit longer, if it's cooler. Okay, so it's been about 2 hours. I'm gonna do one last fold here and then cover it with a towel and let it rise overnight. You can see it's already started to build some structure and has gained a little bit of volume. When you're doing these turns, it is super useful to wet your hands a little bit. Helps the dough to release from the bottom and not stick to your hands. So I'm gonna fold it a few times here, and I can feel, and maybe you can see that it's got a little bit more air in there than when we started, which is a sign that the colony of tasty microbes that we've been cultivating is doing its thing. Cool, so I'm just gonna leave that overnight, and we will be back tomorrow for shaping and baking. Okay, so last night we finished the turns at about 11 p.m. And it is now 8 a.m. So it's been quite a while. You can see the dough has expanded significantly. There's these nice air bubbles on the top. There's a little bit of a skin because I didn't cover it in saran wrap. I just used a kitchen towel last night. Yeah. So what we're gonna do here is we're gonna do our shaping. We're gonna divide this dough into 2 pieces, and we're gonna shape them both into rough rounds to start with. We're gonna let it rest. Then we're gonna shape one more time and put them in the bannetons, which are some proofing baskets. So yeah, let's get this dough out of here. Hopefully it should release from the sides quite easily, notice. So I'm not really using all that much force, just sort of pulling it a little bit. And it should just slide right out. Oops, missed just a tiny little piece there. Great, so once we've got our dough out, you can see that it's sort of pancaking out a little bit, and that's because we haven't built a ton of structure in it yet. I'm gonna use a bench knife. I am gonna coat the bench knife just a little bit with a little bit of flour here, and that's not gonna go on the top of the dough yet, but what that does is sort of lets me cut this without it sticking a lot. Yeah. So you'll notice that it is quite sticky, which is fine. That looks sort of even. Yeah, that's fine. Cool, so I'm gonna move this one off to the side for now, and we'll work with this one.